McKechnie. I want to welcome you to the Lake Bluff History Museum. This is our 11th year of Distinguished Home Awards, and it was Beth Kepper's idea. She used to live on the Cape in Chatham, was it Beth?
Chatham, yes.
And they had this kind of an award system, and what it did is it built appreciation for the historic homes in the area, and that's what we wanted to bring to Lake Bluff. And Paul Bergman is our master of distinguished homes and has a great presentation about the houses that were awarded this year. So thank you for coming. And Paul.
All right,
Paul
good.
Bergman.
All right, well, thank you. I'm Paul Bergman. I grew up in Lake Bluff. People ask, how long have I been here? Well, I've been here since the beginning. Grew up on Sylvan Road. I've been on the Lake Bluff History Museum board for a number of years and served in a series of roles, and along with Beth have been working on the Distinguished Home Award program. And so we're here to honor some new award winners for this year. We've been doing this now for about 11 years, and it's a program that we are finding is becoming more and more fulfilling. It's becoming a bigger part of Lake Bluff, I think, than we actually anticipated. I want to take a second and just read a statement that we made in 2005 when we began this program, because I think what it says then is what we're still trying to do today. It says, in the most basic terms, we at the Lake Bluff History Museum are interested in telling stories. In order to tell those stories, to share history, if you will, what follows that we have to have a deep interest in our sense of time and place. It could be great architecture, it could be simply a timeless visual setting, it could be a unique effort of a homeowner, or it could simply be a location where an important story may have taken place. Each of tonight's, that was for that program, each of tonight's honorees and their properties have contributed some way to a sense that Lake Bluff is a very special place where interesting stories have taken place and continue to take place. So that's what we said in 2005, and I think those comments are still pretty much true today. So I will talk a little bit, I want to explain a little bit about our judging process. We generally try to follow the National Park Service's guidelines for the National Historic Homes. We follow their guidelines, but then we put a Lake Bluff spin on that to make it part of our community. So we're always looking for special social values as well as historical values of properties. We award homes based on some of the architectural categories that the National Register uses. They have a category for preservation, restoration, renovation, and infill. And we have a very special infill house that we're going to talk about today, so you'll get a greater explanation of what the word infill means. And then we've also added a category to that of the Lake Bluff Heritage Award, and that's for our Lake Bluff history. And so that's a little bit about our guidelines. And here's a copy, here's a picture of our plaque that we have. Our plaques are actually over there that you can admire. Our judging committee consists of current or past board members. Kathy O'Hara, Lynn Grenier, myself are the old board members. We have two new members, Janie Jurch and Nan Caldwell. I want to give Nan a special thanks for completely reorganizing our list process. And Beth Kepper is a member of our committee also. She's a former board member, and she's actually, as Kathy said, essentially the founder of our program here. Our judging process that we go through is a selection process where sometimes local residents nominate their own homes. Other times we go and select houses. We're always looking for houses that we think tell a story and are part of the Lake Bluff history. Some of our board members have a great deal of background in areas of expertise. Other people don't have areas of expertise but are just simply very interested people in the historic value of Lake Bluff. So we always start this program out by asking the question, what is it that we like about Lake Bluff? What is it that drives our passion for this community? And so to try and define this as tightly as we can, the Distinguished Home Award seeks to preserve the heritage, character, streetscape, and personable feel of Lake Bluff. And we don't think we understand that until you try and actually put some definition to it. So it's a form that moves around. But we're looking for that indefinable thing that we like so much. We're here to preserve the heritage and character. Some of the comments that come out of the judging process are always very interesting. As we're going through this process, the judging panel and other people involved with this are talking about houses that they say, the house is in scale to the neighborhood. The house is in scale to the lot. The house relates to the history of Lake Bluff. One of my favorite questions that comes up regularly is, would the original owners recognize their house today? I think that's a really neat question for our history of Lake Bluff. So we look at the various periods that occur in Lake Bluff. We have the settlers period, we have the camp meeting period, we have the country club resort era. Then there's a period where Lake Bluff really converts to being a commuter suburb. Then we have World War II, and then finally we have the post-World War II build-out. So we're interested in all of these different time frames and trying to find houses that are representative of that. The degree, this award that we give is purely honorary. So there's no financial incentive that comes with it, there's no tax advantages, there's no limitations on the property. It is purely honorary, and so we like to emphasize that for people who are receiving the award. So we get to our first house. This is 314 Prospect Avenue. It's owned by Bob and Arlene Hunter. We think this is the oldest house on our list. It dates back to 1872 and the Hobbs era. Hobbs was a Methodist minister and a land investor in the camp meeting community. And at one point, we think he owned virtually all of East Lake Bluff because he appears on almost all of the original deeds. But this is a house that has grown organically over its 145-year history. It's had many additions and alterations. And Bob Hunter is a retired architect. He's been in the house for many years, he and his wife, and they believe that the original cottage occupied the west side of the building, so that this area here was the original cottage, and then from there it grew organically out to the east and got its second floor. There were many additions in the 1880s, and we assume that it developed its board and batten siding and the broad porch and the gable facade sometime in the 1880s. By the 1940s, the house had evolved into a duplex. And so when Bob and Arlene bought the house, they literally had to go outside one side of the house to go inside the other side of the house. There was a complete division between the two parts of the house. And so Bob has a lot of fun stories about trying to get from one side of the house and then having to completely start tearing out the innards of the house to try and resolve all of that. He and his wife have done a magnificent job of reshaping the interior of the house. There was also a small stable barn that's now Bob's workshop and Arlene's garden shed that's at the back of the property. And Bob was able to come up with these photographs that he had of the house. We think these photographs date from the 1940s, and it shows the house pretty much in its original format. The house has had, you can't quite tell from the photographs, but these photographs show the original shape of the house, but the house has gotten bigger. It's gotten longer, and the front of the house has come out a little bit, and then they've added a huge bump out onto the back of the house over time. So we'd like to thank them for their award, and we'd like to offer them our plaque. Beth, can you come over and stand with Bob and Arlene? And yeah, good. All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, our second house is Tom and Sally Coyle's house at 610 Sunrise Avenue. We think this house is approximately the same age as the Hunter house, dating from the 1870s or 1880s. Now, when we first nominated this house, I thought my research for this house was going to be kind of simple, because I knew that there was an 1890s or so photograph of this house in the museum's archive. And I was thinking, well, it's going to be just great. All I have to do is show the two photographs and people will understand. But Tom then wrote a wonderful note that he does not think that that house is this house. And he has all sorts of comments in this wonderful note that he's written that says, it can't be the same house because there are too many additions that occurred and too many different changes to the house over time. And so he points out that if you go, when Tom has been up in the attic, if he goes through one of the little attic holes, he can get into another part of the attic where there's still roof shingles from the original part of the house, and then they added on another piece and added on another piece. And he said, if that's the case, then this couldn't have been that. So you've given us a wonderful mystery to work on, and so we have that to work on. We kind of don't know. What we do like about the house is it is a beautiful L-shaped tower Victorian-style house, and it maintains that character. Even though it's been through a lot of changes, the Coyles put a big bump-out addition on the back of it. They connected the house to the garage, modernized the house, new kitchen, all of that sort of stuff. It still retains its essential Lake Bluff character, and that's what we like about the house. And so we would like to thank you, and we'd like to congratulate you for your work on the house at 610 Sunrise. Yeah, good. There we go. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Our third house is 552 Sunrise, owned by Carol Miner. This house is also on Sunrise. This is a little bit later. It's a couple years later than our two earlier homes. We think this home dates to 1888. This land was originally also owned by Hobbs, and I think the house was built by the first owner, a fellow named Josiah Fleming. And Carol has gone through a great deal of research into all of the landowners, and I think it's Fleming who actually built the house. What we like about this house so much is it's the right house in the right place. You get down to the corner of Center and Sunrise. It's our major boulevard from east to west. You get to the lakefront, and you want to see a Victorian-style house like this. And so this is very much part of Lake Bluff. It's part of the lake bluffiness of it. There's been some changes to the house, but what we like about it are the tower, we like the railings, and we like the balcony that's on the top. We like all of the window fenestration that goes down the side of the house. That all seems to be all natural and kind of normal within its environment. And so that's what we like about the house. But this house also has some great social history. These are pictures that Carol gave me before there were 1975 alterations to the house. And one of the big changes is that the house goes from being vertically planked to being a shingle-style house. Shingling the house gives it much more of a New England-style effect, but still you can see that the house is very much intact from its earlier time periods. Now there's this great social history story that goes with this that's just a ball to tell. Carol's husband, who has since passed away, was out working in the yard one day, and a woman drove up, got out of the car, and explained that she had grown up in the house. And her name was Fanshear, and unfortunately we've lost her first name, but she's young Miss Fanshear, or actually at that point middle-aged. Her family lived there from the 1930s to 1957. And she explained that she had a boyfriend, that she and the boyfriend used to flirt, and there is a rock that comes out of the fireplace. The fireplace breast is done in all beach stones, and that there's a rock that you could pull out, and they would put little love notes in there to each other, and write a little note, I love you, and all of that, and stick it in and put the rock back in place. And so Carol's husband invited her into the house, and they looked at the fireplace and they told the story. And by this time, the miners had already repaired the fireplace so that the loose rock wasn't loose anymore. And as the story goes on, the woman explains, and oh, by the way, the fellow I was dating happened to be named Marlon Brando. No kidding. Marlon Brando grew up in Libertyville and been in my house. He's been in Lake Bluff. Okay. This is the kind of social history that we absolutely love. This is just a great, wonderful story. And so we want to thank you for being a good steward of the house, and we want to thank you for this wonderful story. And so we can present you with our plaque. Carol, come on. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So our next house is also a tower house. It's a Victorian-style tower house, but it is not an 1880s house like the earlier ones that we've just seen. This is what's called an infill house. The National Historic Register defines an infill house as a replacement house that fits into a neighborhood with a style and sensitivity that doesn't disrupt the neighborhood. So that if you can take a house out and then plunk a new house in, and the new house looks in many ways and in many styles, it looks like the rest of the neighborhood. That's how they define an infill house. And so this is done with a great deal of style and sensitivity. One of the things that we like, this house is designed by an architect here in Lake Bluff named Ed Deegan. And he's a guy who's building a lot of houses in town. And this is one of the nicest houses that he's done. It's a Gothic Victorian style house, and it becomes Gothic with the lancet, the pointed arched windows, and you see the beautiful shutters that are, when they're closed, form an arch, and when they're open, they form the outside of the arch. We also like the very tall gables that are on the tower, the tall gables on the far side of the house, and the very well-designed dormers that are in the center section of the house. And so we think this is just a great house as being an infill house. Now when we talk about an infill house, sometimes it's kind of fun to say, what was there? And so while I'm a pretty avid preservationist, I believe in preserving the built environment, there also comes a time when maybe getting rid of an old house, maybe we're not losing anything when a house like this disappears and we get something like the house that Ed Deegan designed. So I would like to thank Pam and Eric Olson for being good stewards of the house. Good. Great. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about all of these Victorian era houses and the earlier history of the village. And we want to talk a little bit about a later form of the village. In the 1920s and 1930s, Lake Bluff began to change dramatically. And it began converting from being a camp meeting, a summer resort community where the houses were unoccupied or only used in the summertime, to being a full four-season community. And the houses that were being built in Lake Bluff were a lot more substantial. They were houses that had indoor plumbing, they had full kitchens, they had insulation. For those of you who live in the camp meeting houses, you know the joys of having a house that's insulated. And so we move into an era where this house is built in, we think, 1930. And this is owned by Steve and Carrie Ann Rice. It's at 735 Ravine Avenue. This is, I am standing in Sunrise Park to take the photograph, and right off to the side is Lake Michigan. So this house is right on the lakefront, south end of Sunrise Park. This house represents a wonderful anchor for Sunrise Park. It represents a great, strong social history for Lake Bluff and Chicago also. The house was built by George McKinlock, an electricity utility executive, after he sold a 20-acre estate on Deer Path in Lake Forest. McKinlock founded the Lake Forest American Legion McKinlock Post 265 in honor of his son, who we think was the first soldier killed in World War I in either Lake Bluff or Lake Forest. He also was going to fund an entire campus at Northwestern in honor of his son, but unfortunately he lost his fortune in the mid-1930s and had to withdraw his pledge. There is still a gate on Sheridan Road that is dedicated to McKinlock, so the name is a name that still carries on. So there's a great deal of social history involved with this house that we like to celebrate. So the owners of the house appeared before the Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission several years ago, seeking permission to tear down the house. And when we explained the history of the house to them, they became very intrigued with it and decided to save the house and have done an extensive remodeling of the house. Made all sorts of changes to the house. But in doing so, they have kept the essential nature, the essential design of the house intact. For all of us that grew up seeing this house as kids, it looks exactly as it did back in the 1950s. Now, some things that have changed, the two dormers over here and the roof have changed. The front entrance of the house has changed. It's become brick rather than being wood. There's a garage on the far end that's been added. And so there's been some changes made to the house, all of which we think are great additions to the house and great improvements to the house. And one of the things that we especially like about the work they've done to the house, is this beautiful little Italianate door hood that's over the front door. This is a very angular house. It's all straight angles. It's all triangular shapes and whatnot. And then here comes this welcoming little round arch that just welcomes you to the front door. And we think that's just a really neat addition to the house. We'd like to thank Steve and Carrie Ann Rice. And so then this is 503 Simpson. And Jack and Kristen Wallou live here. And there are some houses in Lake Bluff that are so nicely done the first time, they don't need to be changed. They don't need additions. They don't need to be rebuilt. They're just such nice, handsome, I think of this as a very muscular kind of house. It's just a nice, beefy house that I think is just a superb house. One of the things I think everybody in Lake Bluff loves about this house is the white painted center body brick and then the red accent brick that goes up the eave lines, goes over the tops of the windows and over the tops of the door. That's just a beautiful accent for this house and forms just a really splendid design motif for the house. The house was built for Walter Hall by a contractor named Betts from Highland Park. The house was built in 1937. And there are a number of thoughts that the house may actually have a twin in Highland Park. So there may be another one of these that we haven't found yet. We're not sure if the house is actually there. Blanche Hall, who I was hoping was going to be here today. Blanche Hall is an old Lake Bluffer, and she grew up in Lake Bluff, and she married Walter Hall's son, Robert. And she was kind enough to lend me some of the diaries that Walter Hall, the man who built this house, kept of his life. And he has a diary from 1937 that discusses what's going on with the house. And one of the things that's interesting about the diary is that the diary is topical in addition to being personal. So the diary entries in 1937 will read, "There's a great deal of trouble going on in Europe at the moment," or some sort of statement like that of the coming World War II. Then below that would be commentary about what he was doing at work and how his job was going. And then he would write about the house. They moved into the house July 29, 1937. He wrote in his diary that they spent 2 days waxing the floors after the carpenters left. And then he writes with obvious pride, "In the evening, we can sit on the porch, east side," he notes, "which looks down to the lake and through the many beautiful trees and, of course, over our lawn." And when I saw that quote, I thought of this photograph, and you can still sit on the porch of this house and look down Prospect Avenue and see the lake. And so what he wrote in 1937 is with us today. It's part of our Lake Bluff history of being so proud of that. Now, just before we move off of this slide, I want to make a comment about urbanism. Lake Bluff is an ex-urban town. It is before suburbs are built. And this is a street that still identifies that. When you drive down Prospect or Simpson, there are no curbs in the area. And not having curbs helps preserve that feeling, that sense of Lake Bluff, that we're not in a really heavily structured environment. We're not bound by curbs and sidewalks and lot lines and all of that sort of stuff. That gives you this sense that we're still part of a free and open and easygoing community. And that's an ex-urban concept. It's not suburban and it's not urban. It's not a city concept. So I wanted to point that out with this great vista of sitting on Walter's porch as we are mentally doing that.
Paul, I'd like to add an aside to that. I live on Ravine Forest. We don't have curbs.
Right?
But some years ago, the village was bound and determined that we needed curbs. And so the neighbors kind of all got together and did that idea in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we knew that we were fostering this ex-urban feeling. I think we just thought we didn't want curbs.
It's why you live on Ravine, right? It's why you live on Ravine. There's a lot of this that we don't understand until you put sort of a little scientific bracket around it. You say, well, why do I like this? Well, I'm not sure why I like it, but I know I like it. And then when you get a little scientific bracket around that or a little explanation, you're like, oh, now I really get it. Now I'm really determined.
Yes.
Okay? And so that becomes part of our understanding of what we're trying to do in Lake Bluff. So while Blanche lent me one of the diaries, I copied these 4 photographs out of the diary. I didn't Photoshop them, I didn't touch them up, I just simply scanned them and I put them in here as a montage. These are taken the week that he moved into the house in 1937, and you can see how the trees still bracket the house. You can see the 3 different aspects of the house. And then I like this photograph down in the bottom of the house under construction with the steam shovel down there struggling along to dig the hole. And so that's part of what we like about this group of pictures. And then in 1936, he joined the Knollwood Country Club. And about July of 1937, he writes in his diary that he was so happy to have finally broke a 100 score on 18 holes at Knollwood. And for those of us who have struggled playing golf, breaking 100 at Knollwood is something pretty special. And so I thought we should also add that in. So if you'll come forward and we'll give you your award for Jack and Kristen. There. Nice to see you. Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So,
Okay, look at the camera.
there we go. Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So that's pretty much of our program here. We've given out 6 awards. We've learned a little bit about Lake Bluff history. I want to thank our award winners today and congratulate you. Thank you so much for coming and being part of Lake Bluff. Thank you for all the work you do on your homes. I also want to thank the Distinguished Home Committee that worked on the selection process. I need to thank the board members who've done all of the work in putting together this event for this afternoon.
And we thank you, Paul.
All right. So thank you for your generous support, and let's all enjoy Lake Bluff. So thank you.